All right, everybody, Charlie King here back with you. Thanks for being part of my list that cares about how golf is taught and the direction that we're going in golf instruction. And in this segment today, I wanted to do a book review, and this book may be second nature to everybody at this point, but maybe not. There may be a few of you who don't know about it yet, and those that do, maybe you haven't read it yet. And if you have read it, good for you, because I think this is one of those books that comes along that's really kind of an all of us should read it type book. And it's called The Talent Code. And like I say, by now, it's been mentioned so many times in so many different areas that it's likely that you've probably heard of it by now. But anyway, it kind of came at me from a couple different directions, went ahead and read it, and found it to be very logical and found it to be very helpful. So the premise of the book is, the author of the book is Daniel Coyle, C-O-Y-L-E, and so he felt like, are there really more talented baseball players born in the Dominican Republic? How is it that a single tennis court in Russia could turn out 15, 20 of the top 100 women tennis players? How could a country, South Korea, turn out the level of women's golfers on the LPGA Tour that they've turned out, on and on and on. So he decided to go to these talent hotbeds and find out, what did these have in common? So that was really the premise behind the book, which is, I think, a great premise, and certainly had a lot of merit in terms of him going out there. So as he went out there, he found certain things, and as he interviewed people, he came to several conclusions. So some of the conclusions that I find really helpful is he talked about myelin. So myelin is this material that wraps around the nerve endings, and I may be explaining it somewhat incorrectly, but stay with me on this. And so every time you do a repetition, you get a wrap of myelin. Every time you do a repetition, you get a wrap of myelin. And so the goal in becoming, now he calls it the talent code, I'd call it the skill code, because what he's really saying, to me, talent is what you're born with, and then skill is what you develop. So I would really call it the skill code. And so as you wrap the myelin, as you get more and more repetitions, good repetitions hopefully, then more and more is wrapped, and then that's really where habits are born. That's where habits are inside our brain and in our nervous system. It's also, you've seen, and we've seen that information about 10,000 hours, that has come from various sources. So once again, we saw some of that information in this book. But the main things that he came up with, he talked about myelin, and then the next thing that he talked about was, he talked about deep practice. So deep practice means you practice a lot, and it means that as he saw these different talent hotbeds, he found that the coaches were giving the players more and more difficulty for them to some degree figure out themselves, and to another degree help them figure it out. So if they couldn't figure it out themselves, then the coach would be there to help them figure it out. But it was lending more and more difficulty. So that would, for example, be in golf. Here we are hitting off of a level lie, but except for tee shots, how many lies are truly level when you get to a golf course? So why are we having so many people hit shots off of level lies as opposed to at some point moving them to uneven lies? So that would be the difficulty that they're going to face on the golf course. If a person practiced consistently on uneven lies, how good would they become at, what's the feel to get a ball above your feet, not to hook too much? What's the feel to get a ball below your feet, either to get it to cut or not cut too much? And downhill lies, uphill lies. So that would be an example. How about hitting out of divots? Do you ever have your players practice hitting out of divots? So that would be deep practice, going beyond technique, right? The technique's the basic stuff that we need to do, and then deep practice would be going even beyond that, so that the person is highly skilled in the areas, you know, the guys that become great at trouble shots. You know, didn't happen by accident. They hit a lot of trouble shots. They actually rehearsed and practiced and played around with it and developed a sense and a feel for those shots that most people don't have because they never practiced it. All they did was stand there on the tee and hit level lie golf shots. So that was deep practice. Now the second issue then becomes, why would a person practice that much? You know, why would a person practice that hard? And so what he found was he called it ignition. So the next thing that happened was ignition. So ignition was inside our head, inside our nervous system, something gave us the desire. So he sees individual ignition is just a person having a goal and saying, I want to be X, I want to be Y. You know, I want to do this in my career. I want, you know, somebody watches a basketball game, plays basketball, and wants to be the next Michael Jordan, you know, or the next LeBron James. Somebody watches a football game, wants to be the next Peyton Manning. That would be more individual ignition. But then he also found group ignition. So group ignition would be things that happen. For example, he points back to 1997 or 98 when Serie Pak won the LPGA championship. Well, back home in South Korea, everybody was watching. Dads and daughters were watching. And so now that created an ignition that would then, and he found that it tended to take around 10 years for it to fully blossom from the time that the ignition took place to completion, that it was about 2005, 2006, 2007 that we saw more and more and more and more South Korean women golfers on the LPGA Tour. And then in 1996, Andrew Jones hit a home run. He's from Curacao. He hit a home run for the Atlanta Braves against the New York Yankees, and the whole island of Curacao was watching. And by 2005, 2006, the little island of Curacao won the Little League World Series. So that ignition ignited the entire country in certain places. So then once a person has that ignition, once they have that dream, then that's what gets them to practice so hard. That's what gets them to practice so much. So you can't push somebody unless they've got the pull to go with it that happens from ignition. And then the third thing was coaching. And he called it, he had a chapter called The Talent Whisperers. And I would call it the Skill Whisperers. But irregardless. So he found that coaching had a big deal. Well, see, that's where we come in, right? And he tended to find that the coaches were older. He tended to find where there were these talent hotbeds, the coaches were 50, 60, 70 years old, right? Which really spoke to the years of experience it takes to become truly great at your craft. And maybe the things that you can do to shorten that process and get that process to happen a little bit faster. He found that they were not always exciting, some were, some weren't, but they were always about building skill. They were always about building skill. They were constantly, everything was about building skill. And so they weren't always motivating somebody, they were always coaching somebody. They were always getting them better and better and better and better at their craft. They used the example of John Wooden. They were surprised. These guys studied him as a coach, and they were surprised at how his practices went. They weren't what they thought it would be, meaning that they thought it would be like a lot of practices. Okay, everybody huddle up, right? And it'd be kind of a pep talk, and then off we go. They came out, and the centers went here, the forwards went here, the guards went here, and they started doing their drills. And Wooden would come by and check with different people, and he would do, they said he rarely, if ever, said a sentence with more than 4 words in it. A little quicker, a little faster. You know, he 2, 3, 4 word exhortations, which were skill building pieces of information for them. He was giving them feedback. And so as they look back at it after that, I think they'd been there for a couple of months, they realized that 75 to 80% of his communication was spent building skill. That was his secret. And so how much of our time is built, you know, giving them the idea and then bit by bit by bit, giving them the feedback on how to become the player that they can become. He had a, let me find this diagram in here. So he had a diagram of what, you know, what it would look like. So there would be ignition, and there would be master coaching, kind of on the front end and all the way through this process. And then there would be all these different levels of deep practice. And then it would lead to what he calls talent, I would call skill. And so the things that I get out of the book, the things that I think we've got to take from the book is, how much coaching are we doing? I think we spend too much time as a group arguing about swing playing, arguing about the little minor, what I consider minor points. And we need to have already gotten that as far as our skill set and our information set. And we need to then be getting our players to create ball flights, hit it solid, good short games, good putting, good mental side of the game, good course management, the uneven lies, the fairway bunker shots, the trouble shots. I mean, that's where we get into the deep practice. And that's where we also get into, we do have to create the dream inside our players' head that makes them want to practice. You know, as opposed to us just lecturing them that they need to practice. The more they have the dream and the idea and the thought, that then leads to their desire to practice. So make sure that you grab Talent Code. I would highly suggest that you read it, and then, you know, let's put some of these things into practice and kind of measure what you're doing against what he talks about in here. And I'm also, just be on the outlook, I'm going to be giving you links to some of the videos that he has on his website, which are really good about building skill and becoming what he calls talented, I call skillful. So thanks a lot for your attention, and you know, if you have any other books you'd like me to review, just let me know. I'll just put it in the comment section. Thanks.